Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Barbara sent me a note and said, Steve, I think you covered this. And I actually stopped covering it because it was happening so often. Both David and Barbara sent me the story, though. And we're talking about the Payroll Protection Plan, the PPP, and the other COVID relief programs, which were just robbed blind. And I used to do stories about this, and the stories became so common, I simply stopped doing them. And one of my criticisms of the plan, and this is a common criticism many people had, was that it was so easy to get money from the program, whether you deserved it or not, that it just brought people out of the woodwork who came in and stole the money. And now they are saying that the theft in this program was on such a big scale, it might be the biggest fraud in a generation. That's the actual quote from the headline of the story from NBCnews.com. The looting of the COVID relief plan known as PPP. So Ken Delanian and Laura Strickler wrote this for NBC News. The official in charge of the COVID relief tells NBC News that programs like PPP were structured in ways that were an invitation to fraudsters. And one of the things that I pointed out, and a lot of people pointed this out, was that it was so easy to apply for and get this money that you could just say, I own a company that's got 500 employees and I need the money for them. And they would just send you the money. And it was no one bothered to check anything until after the money's gone. And they're like, let's check to see if that guy's got 500 employees. Oh, he doesn't. Ask him if he'll send the money back. Well, many of the people were doing things like buying Lamborghinis and Ferraris, so it's kind of hard to just immediately cash those back in. But many who participated in what prosecutors are now calling the largest fraud in American history couldn't resist purchasing luxury automobiles, mansions, private jet flights, and swanky vacations. But this largest fraud in U.S. history is the theft of hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer money intended to help those harmed by the pandemic. Those people, the fraudsters, came into the riches by participating in what experts say now is the theft of as much as $80 billion of the $800 billion that was part of the Paycheck Protection Program. 10% of that program, they estimate, was stolen. 10%. That's on top of the $90 billion to $400 billion believed to have been stolen from the $900 billion COVID unemployment relief program. They think that half of that was taken by international fraudsters. That is half the money that was stolen. So the money was stolen and it's gone to other countries, which will make it a little harder to recover, just a little harder. Another $80 billion was potentially stolen from a separate COVID disaster relief program. And as I complained back in the day, that they would accept applications from people who would just say, I've got a couple hundred employees and I need payroll money for them. And they, here you go. And they just hand them a check. And then later on, they'd go, let's double check to see that guy's really got a couple hundred employees. He doesn't even have a company, let alone employees. Can we have the money back? And all they had to do was put in some very, very basic steps just to say, if you claim you've got hundreds of employees on a payroll, I don't know, send us documentation of the payroll. I mean, it appears they weren't even doing that. So the prevalence of COVID relief fraud has been known for some time, but the enormous scope and its disturbing implications are only now becoming clear. Even if the highest estimates are inflated, the total fraud on all COVID relief fund amounts to a mind-boggling sum of taxpayer money that could rival the $579 billion in federal funds included in the most recent 10-year infrastructure spending plan proposed in Washington. It's according to prosecutors, government watchdogs, and private experts who are trying to plug the leaks. Nothing like this has ever happened before, said Matthew Schneider, a former U.S. attorney from Michigan, now with Honigman. It is the biggest fraud in a generation. Most of the losses are considered unrecoverable, but there's still a chance to stop some of the bleeding because federal officials say $600 billion is still waiting to go out the door. So they know of $600 billion that hasn't been stolen yet. That's the good part. The current administration imposed new verification rules that administration officials say appear to have made a difference in curbing fraud. But they acknowledge that programs in 2020 sacrificed security for speed. And they say that happened needlessly, which is what I said all along. if somebody comes and goes, I need the money today, you say, well, you can't have it today. You might have it tomorrow. No, I need it today. Really? Your 500 imaginary workers can't wait till tomorrow? Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz, who oversaw COVID relief spending, told NBC that COVID relief programs were structured in ways that made them ripe for plunder. Ripe for plunder. The Small Business Administration is sending that money out basically said to people, apply and sign and tell us that you're really entitled to money. And of course, for fraudsters, that's an invitation. What didn't happen was even minimal checks to make sure that the money was getting to the right people at the right time. The criminal methodology varied depending on the program. The epic swindle of COVID unemployment relief has been carried out by individual criminals or organized crime groups using stolen identities to claim jobless benefits from state workforce agencies dispersing federal funds. Each identity could be worth up to $30,000 in benefits. And of course, it causes problems, not just for the money that got stolen, but for the person whose name the money was stolen in. Because they might come now to you and say, hey, you applied for $30,000 in funds you weren't entitled to. And you go, what now? And that's because someone stole your identity. The looting of the Paycheck Protection Program worked differently and could be far more lucrative. That program authorized banks and other financial institutions to make government-backed loans to businesses, loans that were to be forgiven if the company spent the money on business expenses. Nearly 10 million of these loans have already been forgiven. Many of these loans turned grants were for millions of dollars. Experts say millions of borrowers inflated the number of employees or created companies out of thin air. For much of 2020, lenders did little to verify the applications, prosecutors and experts say, in part because Congress required the Small Business Administration to issue explicit guidance that in the interest of getting the money out fast, lenders will be held harmless for borrowers' failure to comply with program criteria. The Government Accountability Office warned of fraud risk, but the program continued under that rule. So just to be clear, many people, when I talk about this, point out quite rightly, they say, Steve, the money, although it came from the government, was being administered by banks. So banks were authorized and told, this money comes from the government, but you guys distribute it. So people will come into the banks, figuratively speaking, and apply for these loans. And the banks will then decide how much money to lend to these people. And then, of course, those loans get forgiven. Now, in normal circumstances, if you go into a bank and go, I want to borrow money, they will ask you a bunch of things, check your credit, check your background, see if you've got collateral, see what your credit history looks like, all kinds of stuff. And if you're buying a house, they make you jump through hoops, all kinds of stuff. And they do that because the banks themselves could be on the hook if something bad goes wrong with that loan. Plus, there's federal guidelines if the loans are federally backed. There's all kinds of different things coming into play here. But the point simply is this, that if you tell the bank, by the way, you're not on the hook if you make a bad loan, but we'll pay you a fee for making the loan, it incentivizes the banks to just shove the money out the front door. The faster they can lend it, the faster they get their fees. And there ain't nothing slowing them down because they're not going to be held liable for what they do. And so that is insanity. That is insanity. And so getting back to this again, the banks will be held harmless for borrowers' failure to comply with program criteria. So the banks might even know that there's criteria that these people are supposed to follow. It's not our job. Our job is to just shovel the money to them. So we shovel the money to them, and if they do it wrong, that's between the government and them. That's not us. It's dangerous to put someone in your chain of command and tell them you get to make decisions that have no ramifications for you. They have ramifications for the people above you. They got ramifications for the people below you, but none for you. You will be held harmless for anything you do. Watch how quickly you stop caring when you find out that there's no ramifications to you for anything stupid you do. And when you pay someone to make loans and they're not being paid to vet the loans, like I said, give them a pitchfork and pile the cash in hundreds in the lobby of the bank and let them just fork it out the front door, because that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. So this is perhaps the biggest fraud in U.S. history. If not, it is at least the biggest fraud in a generation. And the story I referenced here is at NBC News. It's several pages long. I just scratched the surface. They give examples in here, just crazy, crazy examples of people who just lied and said, oh yeah, I got a company with 100 employees. They got nothing, not even a company. They go out and buy a fleet of Lamborghinis and a mansion and go on vacation. I mean, why not? You don't have a business to run. You have an imaginary business, but you can run your imaginary business while you're sitting on a beach in Providenciales, Turks and Caicos, admiring the white sand and the blue water and getting drinks with umbrellas, which is the only place on earth you can order that drink and be proud of it. Just work with me on that one. But it's a crazy story from NBC News, and Barbara and David both sent it me. Thanks a lot. But Ken Delaney and Laura Strickler wrote it. Biggest fraud in a generation. The looting of COVID relief plan known as PPP from NBCnews.com. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Education breeds confidence. Confidence breeds hope. Hope breeds peace.